Have you ever looked at one of your finished ink drawing portraits and thought, I love it, but I am terrified to touch it with watercolor? I completely understand. Most artists freeze up when it comes to adding watercolor or any other color, and it's because they're afraid of ruining an ink drawing that they spent hours creating. But what if I told you the secret isn't learning dozens of watercolor techniques? It's simply understanding light and shadow. And today I'm going to show you how one simple watercolor wash technique can make your ink portraits come alive. And I'll demonstrate it on several different faces so you can see just how forgiving this process really is. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Aaron, and this channel is all about helping aspiring illustrators become more confident with pen and ink. In the last episode, we learned how to safely introduce watercolor to your ink drawings. Today, we're taking another step forward. We're going to be using watercolor for one purpose, to describe light and shadow. Not fancy paintings, not complicated color mixing, just simple, transparent washes that make your portraits feel three-dimensional while keeping every beautiful ink drawing and line and hatch mark visible. And by the end of this lesson, I hope you're going to realize that watercolor, it's not something to fear. It's simply another way of showing light. Before I even pick up a brush, I ask myself one question. Where is the light coming from? I highly suggest you do the same thing because this simple practice will make your ink drawings pop and guide you through the entire process of adding watercolor. So everything really does depend on that answer. Where is the light coming from? The watercolor isn't deciding where the shadows go. That light source you choose, it already decided that, especially if you're observing it. And our job is simply to do that. Observe it. Observe where light and shadow meet your object and describe the form. This is exactly the same thing we've practiced with cubes, spheres, cylinders, and all the simple forms on this channel. A face is simply a collection of those forms working together. When you begin thinking this way, watercolor becomes much less mysterious. So remember, the secret is water. That's the technique we're going to focus on today. The more water you add, the lighter the wash becomes. The less water you use, the richer, the darker those colors are going to appear. That is one of the greatest strengths of watercolor. You don't need 20 different gray colors or blue colors. You simply control the amount of water on your brush. And today, I'll use just one color for a couple of these portraits to really demonstrate what I'm talking about. And just remember to let the water create the value. It's a technique that will build such a confidence inside you that you'll really begin looking at ink and watercolor differently. Think of the water as your value control. The brush is simply carrying it to the paper. All right, so let's look at the first face. Let's begin with the face lit from above. Notice that I'm starting incredibly light, almost too light, but that's intentional. Watercolor is forgiving because we can build gradually. I'm placing one transparent wash over the entire shadow family on this face. Now I load the tip of my brush with pigment and I add in less water. Notice what I'm not doing. I am not painting eyelashes. I'm not painting wrinkles. I'm not chasing all those tiny details. I'm painting shadow and preserving the light. The ink already drew the portrait with some contour lines and hatch marks. The watercolor simply reveals the lighting as you paint around it. Oh, and if you want to know where you can get these exact highly pigmented watercolors as well as the archival waterproof pens that I'm using, and I really love using, my art storefront is linked in this video's description as well as the homepage of my YouTube channel. All right, let's go to face number 2. Now let's change the light source. The portrait has side lighting on this one. Watch how the entire shadow family shifts from one area to the other area of the face. This is why I love going online and using many different references as possible. You get to observe how light describes form with watercolor. I'm using the same technique of controlling water flow. This is why understanding value really matters so much more than understanding color. Not that it's a bad thing to understand color, but you got to understand value first. Once you know where the light is and how to control the water flow, the watercolor can literally describe your entire object. Okay, let's move on to the last face, face number 3. Now let's look at this third example. We saw how using only one color can instantly make your ink drawings pop. But let's look at what happens when you start layering in progressive colors using the same values and the same technique of water control. Since my reference has a little bit of a lighter skin tone and looks like he's been a little bit tanned by the sun, I'll start off with a yellow orange. Now you do that by mixing lemon yellow and cadmium red. Notice how much more water I'm using for my first layer. That creates a really gentle transition from light into shadow. This layer is similar to the very light mid-tone. I use the most water for this layer. So I gradually work my way up to an orangey red by mixing cadmium red and carmine. The watercolor isn't loud and shouting. It's very soft and very translucent, but effectively describing the form on this face. I'm still using a decent amount of water, but not as much. So now let's just let the layer dry for a minute or so. That's the cool thing about watercolor. It's a fast, very quick medium, but then there's times where you have to wait and be a little bit of patient for it to dry. All right, so this is where the warm tones of the skin are, and we can actually start adding in a little bit of cooler tones. And let's really make this ink drawing pop. Now I'm using a little bit less water and I'm loading the tip of my brush with some blue. I'm using ultramarine blue. I also have Prussian blue, but I kind of prefer ultramarine blue for the shadows more. Use it and you'll see how beautiful it can give you some good shadows on this already layered portrait that we have, just to keep the drawing lively and energetic. Those subtle value shifts are often far more energetic than the really dramatic contrasting ones where you use black and a lot of highlights. Every portrait has its own personality because every lighting situation is different. And one of the biggest mistakes I see many artists make is that they're trying to control every single brushstroke. Watercolor has a very expressive nature on its own. So just make sure you stay loose. Let the watercolor do what it does best. And that's give you really nice pops of detail and expressiveness. Let the brush move over your ink drawings. Don't scrub it. Just stroke it with your brush. Don't overwork it. Allow the water to do what it naturally does. Some of my favorite paintings happen because I stopped trying to control everything. Those little surprises often give watercolor its beauty and energy. All right, so remember, don't be afraid. If there's one thing I hope you take away from today's lesson, it's that don't let fear keep your watercolor palette closed. Your ink drawing isn't as fragile as you think. Start with a light wash. Observe your reference. Where's the light? Where's the dark? Where's the shadows? Trust the process. Layer. If it's too light, you can always add in another layer after it dries. Confidence doesn't come from never making mistakes. It comes from learning that mistakes are part of becoming a better artist. And we have to understand that growth is often a process of faithful practice. God, our Creator, He designed us with the ability to learn, to improve, and to create. Every page in our sketchbook is another opportunity to steward that gift and enjoy the beauty of His creation. And I'd love for you to try this today, okay? Grab one waterproof pen. I got plenty of them in my art store, linked in the description. Grab a brush and one watercolor. Draw these simple faces using 3 different lighting directions. Don't worry about making them perfect. Focus on seeing light. Keep your washes very transparent at first. Remember, stay loose, have fun, and don't be afraid to add watercolor to your ink drawings. And if this video helped you, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like, because next week we're going to be taking this series to the next level. And we're going to be combining simple hatching with watercolor washes to create even richer portraits and figure drawings. Until next time, keep drawing, keep creating, and never stop developing the gifts that God gave you. I'll see you on the next one.